stuck here. The cops won't bother me. First crash.
Man, after riding the Cb500 for such a long time, and then coming back to the old steel here, this bike definitely feels very different. I think the Vstrom has a little bit of an edge when it comes to performance than the CB, mainly because it's got a little bit more horsepower. This bike has got 66 horsepower, I believe. The Cb500 has 49, and you can definitely tell they make the power at about the same RPMs. I think the CB makes it a little bit lower at 8500, makes full power, and this one makes the 66 horsepower at 8800. But the reason this one shines a little bit more is that the way it makes power. The V-twin definitely has an edge on the street, and if you have not ridden a V-twin bike that's configured like this, like a Ducati or SV650, RC51, they're very like good for street riding because the way they make power, it's like they make a little bit more power throughout the rev range, so it feels very easy to ride them. It's a really fascinating bike. V-twins seem to provide some of the best in street performance for motorcycles. Look at this guy. It's like a middle-age crisis. Porsche Carrera 4S. Yeah, you know, it used to be Porsche used to be the official car of middle-age crisis. Now they've gone up in price, and now people are kind of getting more into them. Yeah, the V-twin makes great street power. I don't think you can explain that to guys who see the stats and they normally see lower horsepower figures for V-twins. And even when you're riding them, like, it's just a very different quality. They feel a little bit more real. I think that's one of the problems with the Cb500. It feels almost stale the way the engine is. It's inline 2, so it's not a very interesting engine, and the noise it makes is very bland and very boring. It's a great bike, and I do love the inline 2s, mainly for the efficiency of the bikes. I hammer it a little bit later, you'll hear that V-twin. I mean, if I crank it even like that, it sounds really, really good. Of course, with the V-twin, you have the cylinders, like one is pointed towards your crotch, one is pointed towards the front wheel. So that means that you have to do double the work if you have to like work on the engine. And I'm not really into working really hard on the engine. I like that the cylinders are all in one place, and that's why I like my Ninja 250. It's a twin cylinder, very much like the Cb500. Very similar sort of design, and that's a very easy bike to work on. So when you consider keeping bikes for a long time, an inline 2 probably is a better bike to keep. Man, this lady's all over the place. It's like these people just keep texting and they can't even hold the line. I really get annoyed by these cars that they can't stick to the like yellow lane. There's a bunch of kids in the car too. Sometimes I think people are just getting dumber, but I think it's because of their phones. They're not paying attention. Another thing with the Vstrom, when you sit on the Vstrom compared to the CB, you feel like you're inside the bike. All of this kind of is going down quite a bit. So you have a lot of plastic almost at shoulder level, and then you have your windscreen that goes all the way up top. And then of course you have plastic on the side here that Suzuki could have potentially made a little bit narrower if they wanted to make it a little bit more nimble looking. But they decided to keep it like a very wide sort of body. And it feels better to ride on the highway because this sort of body deflects a lot of the wind and makes it a little bit more comfortable. Also, the seat in the Vstrom is much more comfortable than the CB, just because it's wider and a little bit longer. And another thing that the Vstrom is better at is that it's got a longer wheelbase, so it feels much more like stable. And it's got a 19-inch front wheel, so that makes it a little bit more stable over rough roads. The Cb500 is a lot more nimble in twisty roads than this one. And this has nothing to do that I have a car tire on it. It feels just a little bit more flickable. In reality, the top speed is 95 miles, and that's it. Downhill, it'll go to 100. But it's just not a very fast bike when it comes to top speed. I heard a couple of people saying that they tested their bikes and they've gotten like 110 or whatever, and it had more power. I just don't see how that's even possible. When it comes to reliability, I expect that Honda is going to be extremely reliable. The Cb500 that I rode developed a leak, an oil leak in the, what is it, the left side, or was it was in the right side of the crankcase, and it also started to be extremely difficult to start. I don't know what that means. I think it's just because it was taken to the shop and had an oil change and all of these things, and I think they might have adjusted the compression or the timing, and it turned out they didn't do a very good job. So that's kind of like what happened. Any criticism when it comes to bikes or cars, and generally the way I look at it, I'm not really a journalist, and it's one of the reasons I love YouTube, because you get to hear real people's opinions and not just some person that's getting paid by a manufacturer to test out the bike for a day or two. So I don't mind telling people what I really think about bikes in general, because I have nothing to gain. The only thing I have to gain is like viewers and subscribers and that all sort of thing, which means absolutely nothing. Now, the Suzuki Vstrom makes a really good bike, but it's an ugly bike, and oftentimes people do get bikes based on looks. So I'm kind of thinking, why doesn't Suzuki do a better job styling the Vstrom? Because clearly people love the styling of the BMWs and the KTMs, at least I do. And those bikes, when you look at them, they're not like bland looking, they're quirky looking, they have a certain je ne sais quoi. And I think for bikes you kind of have to do that, because people buy bikes based on passion, not really so much for common sense. You know, I would get a car because I want the utility of it, but a motorcycle, I want it to be a little bit quirky, I want it to kind of resemble my personality. So I would want something to be styled a little bit better. Look at that little Grom. I'm kind of curious if I can catch up with that Grom. That guy was booking. Man, it's just a tiny little wheel. It's like a scooter wheel. I think for a lot of new riders that want to get into motorcycling, specifically women who are short, this would be a good bike, because it's not intimidating like when you ride a GSX-R 600, SV650. Any bike looks intimidating when you're a short woman. So these things are so cute looking. I think for me, I would ride it for a little bit. Section, real smart. I couldn't make it, buddy. See ya.